Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. My guest today is Erik Voorhees. Hello, Erik. How you doing, man?
Hey, Mark. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to get into Venice and the AI and crypto and all that stuff. But before we do that, I have to ask you, it's the morning after the big election. How are you feeling about things, and what is your reaction to everything that's happened?
Yeah, big day yesterday. I didn't think it was going to be quite so big of a landslide. Maybe that's because I was listening too much to the mainstream media. I was glad that Trump won, although I'm not a fan of him and did not vote for him. Didn't vote for anyone.
Oh wow!
Just because I refused to participate in that clown show. But I had a preference for him to win. Certainly, it was better for crypto, but people shouldn't vote for their rulers just because of their own bags. So yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was happy to see the Democratic establishment get so obliterated. Will this lead to them like changing who they are or what they do? Probably not. They'll probably just maybe double down and like call people even bigger racists now. We'll see.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah. So I think it is the better outcome for the country. And now really what matters is like what Trump actually does, because campaign speeches are worth very little and actions done during the presidency could be worth a lot. But he had 4 years before and didn't do much great things. So we'll see if he can do a better job this time.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I have to agree with you on that. I think he didn't drain the swamp. There were a lot of things he said he was going to do that he didn't end up doing. But I actually feel like I feel like last time we had Gandalf the Gray, and now we have Gandalf the White. And it's, there's the people around. He's different. The people around him are different. The vibe is just very different. He didn't like Bitcoin the first time around, right? This time, he keynoted at Bitcoin Nashville, right? And he's got, he's saying he's going to fire Gary Gensler, right? So it feels
he
different.
Has said a bunch of great things. It does feel different. I have to be very guarded in any kind of like enthusiasm for any presidential candidate, almost regardless of his intentions. I just don't think you can do much against the inertia of such bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But let's see. His first test is a very falsifiable one. Day one, free Ross.
Yes.
He'll either do that or he won't day one. And that's an easy thing for him to do. It costs him nothing, right? He doesn't need anyone else's approval. So that'll be a really good indicator of if he's going to live up to anything good.
So one thing that does confuse me though, Erik, is, I'm a big fan of your writings. I've watched you for a long time, listened to a lot of things you've said. Loved your speech, by the way. I think it was at Bitcoin Nashville. I was describing it. It felt like you're like the Daniel Webster of our movement, right? You're just very, very, you're very clear when you speak and very passionate in a way that kind of nobody else is. And so knowing these things, looking at Trump, Trump's crass, Trump's Trump, we know that. But in an imperfect world, he's sort of I think he's the best we're ever going to get in terms of the ideal president, because those same qualities that sort of make him bad also enable him to survive, massive impeachments and indictments, getting shot at, and, basically not aging in his first term, unlike most presidents who age really hard. So whatever that quality is, it's bad and it's good, and it's probably the best we're going to get. Being very aware, this is the same argument I made for SBF, which I was wrong about. Where well, we'll talk about that later. But what is the disconnect between you and me? Why don't you like him more? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, if he's the best we're going to get out of a nation of 350 million people, if Donald Trump is the cream of the crop, the preeminent statesman of our time, that's pretty embarrassing.
Okay.
I don't mind that he's crass, none of that stuff bothers me. What bothers me is his policies. And I can distill it most simply into just this one fact. He came in last time stating he was going to drain the swamp. The government only grew under him.
Yeah, that's true.
It only grew. And that's a just empirical, falsifiable fact. So people can use whatever rhetoric they want, but like if there's a conservative candidate that gets into office and doesn't even reduce the size of the government by $1, the hell is the point, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so, I hear that. Okay, well, that does explain the disconnect.
Yeah, someone who I would be excited about, Javier Milei in Argentina.
Yes.
Now there's a man. There's a fucking man. He is incredible.
Yep. He did a Twitter to fucking Argentina, right? He chopped it all away, and it's going great guns now.
Yeah, I would have thought a politician like that in today's age was impossible. He's the greatest thing happening in the West, in the political scene, I guess, in the world. So if Trump spent the next 2 weeks like shadowing Milei and then replicated him, that would be incredible. We'll see if it happens.
Well, Elon clearly likes Milei. They were like broing down somewhere. I just saw him on Twitter. I forget where it was, but he's clearly a fan, and the love seems to flow in both directions. So and now we got Elon in Trump's ear. So
yeah, the guy runs around with like a chainsaw as a prop to like show how much he wants to like.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he is. There's all these like memes of him with his chainsaw because he's just like destroying all the departments of the government in Argentina. It's incredible, and it's obviously much harder to do that in a larger country like the U.S. But if Trump could even eliminate one department of anything, I'd be a fan.
Well, I mean, fingers are crossed. We'll have to see what happens next, but it does seem like he's headed in the chainsaw direction. So, fingers crossed. Like I said, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk now about VeniceAI. So, why don't you tell us in your own words what VeniceAI is?
Yeah. So, I've been building crypto companies for like 14 years, and realized once these AI apps started coming out, ChatGPT, for example, that they were incredibly powerful and impressive, but everything that you do is being recorded by a centralized company. And the answers that you get back are censored. And sometimes the censorship is like in small or somewhat benign ways, and sometimes it's very clear and obvious. And that just, to me, seemed like a very dangerous path for humanity to go down, where super intelligent artificial intelligence was obviously going to be a huge part of human civilization. And if everyone is interacting with only centralized, censored versions of it, the risk of capture by the state to become essentially like a propaganda piece to control and spy on the population is really, really dangerous. So I started VeniceAI as an alternative to that. So it's essentially like a ChatGPT chatbot. You can do text and images and code, but it's private, so it's not saving any of your content. Venice never stores your prompts or the responses, and it's not censored. So you can talk about any topic. We're not going to scold you for saying something inappropriate or not politically correct or whatever. You just have direct access to very cutting edge artificial intelligence, and that's the goal.
Yeah, it's super awesome. So I obviously I knew what it was before you told us, but so rhetorical question, and not only is it a product that I just like, I use it daily, so it has become my go-to. Yeah, so I'm a huge fan, and I love it. The uncensoredness is really the sort of big thing for me.
Yeah.
I recently had, and I'll just give a specific example. So my dad, unfortunately, recently passed away, kind of beginning of this year, and it was a COVID related thing, and in trying to research the sequence of events of what happened to him. I became suspicious about vaccine injury issues. And so, without getting into a lot of detail about that, I tried the other engines to try to find out information about, what are the statistics we have on X, Y, and Z. And they were just like, we're not going to tell you. We can't talk about that. And VeniceAI was like, here you go. Here's what you want. and
Yeah,
answered every question cleanly in detail with figures, and it was awesome, dude. So thank you for that.
yeah, you're
really
welcome.
great.
I like that story. I mean, I wish it was in a happier moment, but
Yeah,
it's
me too.
the danger is that people are interacting with AIs thinking that they are talking to a machine intelligence, but in reality, they're talking to a machine intelligence that's being run through a bunch of human filters. Some of them subtle, some of them overt. And so you don't actually know what the machine is saying. You kind of get back the machine plus a bunch of committees of humans and whatever politicians and regulators are behind the scenes, like pushing on them. And that can be pretty dark. You can imagine if these AI apps were around during the heyday of COVID, if you asked things back then about the vaccine or anything, or masks or whatever, all those centralized firms would have been just parroting the government, either because they actually believed the government or because the government was forcing them to do it, or some combination of both. And that is the kind of thing that I would expect in Soviet Russia or China. In America, that shouldn't be the thing. And I'm glad that those companies exist. Like they're pushing AI forward in all the cutting edge ways that we're enjoying and getting benefit from. So I don't think they're evil or that they should go away. But if there's not an alternative, if you can't fact check one AI with another, if you can't interact directly with machines without a human being involved, then there's a very dystopian future ahead for humanity. And we just want to provide an alternative.
Hash Rate is sponsored by Ledger. With the announcement of Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, Ledger gives you the best security on the planet for your crypto and identity. Ledger Flex and Stacks drive an e-ink screen with the same secure chip that's in your credit card and passport, except instead of protecting the secrets of banks and governments, Ledger protects your secrets and your private keys. Ledger supports Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more than 200 other tokens. The secure touchscreen, plus the Ledger Live app, means that whether you're buying your very first Bitcoin or doing your 2000th swap, you can do it securely and easily with your Ledger. And as always, use my link, shop.ledger.com/hashrate in the show notes to get the very best price whenever you buy a Ledger Flex or Stacks. OpNet is the ultimate solution for deploying smart contracts directly onto the Bitcoin blockchain, leveraging its security and stability. As a meta protocol, OpNet allows you to run Ethereum-style smart contracts on any UTXO-based blockchain, including Bitcoin and fractal Bitcoin. With OpNet, there's no need to rewrite your existing smart contracts from scratch. Simply deploy them on OpNet, and you're live on Bitcoin or fractal with no modifications required. Start your journey on OpNet today by visiting opnet.org. Now, you describe it as a decentralized AI. So it's, so basically with something like ChatGPT or pretty much any of the other AIs, there's a company behind it. The company runs it. If the government decides they don't like what the company is doing, as they did with social media, with Facebook and the old Twitter, the government can then come in and there's a throat to choke. They could say, hey, you need to start editing answers like X, Y, and Z. You want to make sure that never happens. So your AI is decentralized. In what sense is it decentralized? Why isn't there a central throat to choke?
Yeah, good question. So first and foremost, the AI model is open source always in Venice. So we offer several different models. These are open source. Largely, they come from Meta's Llama models, which are the biggest and best open source models out there. And when it's open source, it means you can actually see what the weights of the different parameters in the model are. If you talk about Anthropic or ChatGPT, their models are not open. So you don't actually know what the parameters are doing or how they're related with each other. And so when the censorship happens, it's harder to tell or where that's coming from. So step
So
one
this would
is
be like sort of analogous to knowing the algorithm of Google. It's, when you say the
yeah, that's a reasonable analogy. It's also, like from a crypto context, there's a reason why any blockchain that wasn't open source would be laughed at, right? Because we're trying to build adversarial systems in which you don't have to trust anyone. And the only way to not have to trust people is if all levels of the stack are open source. So the hardest part of that is the model itself. And 2 years ago, the open source models were nowhere near as good as the chat GPTs. But they were gaining ground pretty rapidly. A year ago, they were catching up. And today, sometimes in certain tests, they'll beat a chat GPT or an Anthropic. So they're in the same ballpark now, which is important.
That is wild.
Yeah. And huge credit to Meta. Like I know people love to hate on Facebook and stuff. And who knows what Zuckerberg's intentions are, but their actual action here, which has been to train the leading open source model and to continue releasing it, from there, all sorts of other individuals and teams can take it and tune the model and everything. They deserve a huge amount of credit for it. And it's really been a huge blessing.
Yeah. So let me ask you just to clarify something here. When you say the model and it's been trained by Meta, in order to train these models, you need monstrous amounts of GPU and you need monstrous amounts of data. And, all of that, that tends to make it so that very large centralized players are really the only ones that can do it in a competitive way so that theirs is the best. And so they use their monstrous GPU and data to train the model. Then the model is actually pretty small once they're done. And then they release that, and then everyone gets that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that pretty much right? Okay.
Yeah. Like the frontier models, the big ones that are trained by these big firms, they cost to train on the order of magnitude of like $100 million or more to train it.
Jesus.
Once that training is done, you end up with this kind of magic box, and that then can be released and fine-tuned or further trained in much cheaper and easier ways. But that first bulk of work is a hugely capital-intensive thing. And it is much higher in cost relative to the size of the parameter count and the size of the models. So like smaller models can be trained for much less, but those big frontier models really require a huge amount of capital expense.
Now, do those when they hand the model off to you, it's sort of frozen in time, right? So it doesn't know anything, like it doesn't know the news, right? You wouldn't be able to ask it about current events, right?
Yeah. So we solved that in Venice, but so yeah, like basically when the model's trained, any information in the world up to that point it will know about, but nothing after it. So I think the Llama model ended its training like sometime in early 2023, and what we've done in Venice is like, if you want to know, what's happening in New York City right now, our model actually will like go pull, search from the web, pull those results into the LLM, into the model, and then it'll use its whole corpus of knowledge plus these new results from the web to then answer intelligently and give you something. So, with that kind of trick behind the scenes, it feels to a user as if it's a live thing that knows things today. And that was actually quite fun to build that, because the model didn't do it on its own. And like we just had to kind of figure out these little tricks. It's amazing like how we've even been able to use the AI in our own systems. Like we try to figure out when a user enters their prompt, whether that question requires the internet or whether it doesn't. If someone's asking about the Black Plagues in Europe, obviously that doesn't need a web search. Like all that kind of knowledge is already in these big models. So we run the questions through the AI to ask itself if the question needs the web. Like, do you think that this question requires up-to-date information? And the AI answers that alone. And if the answer is yes, then it goes and does the web search. And if it's no, then it doesn't. And it's incredible to work with these systems and see how powerful they are. And really, like humanity has a massively powerful, important, and incredible machine that it has just started to unlock. And people really have no idea like how much this is going to affect humanity, for good and ill, probably both.
Yeah, no, totally agree on all those counts. So, okay, so we've talked about the software and the models and to the data for the training. What about hosting it? How is Venice hosted, and is that decentralized? And is crypto involved at all? Like, if I host a node, do I get some coins like in Bittensor, or is that just not something you guys do at all?
No, so Venice is not training any models and is not a blockchain. It's simply a web app that allows you to access the models very easily for desktop or mobile. The way it works simply, if you're talking about like OpenAI, is that when you open ChatGPT and you enter your prompt, that prompt goes to OpenAI. They store it and save it forever, attached to your ID. They're running the compute on it, and they give back the answer. And so they have your question, your ID, and the answer all in their database forever, for any hacker, for any employee, for any government that comes knocking, for any AI in the future, that wants to learn about Mark Jeffrey. They can just access
we know it's
this.
Coming. So yeah,
we know it's coming. Yeah. So that's all there in this big honeypot. So in Venice's case, we do it quite differently by taking your prompt, running it through an encrypted proxy to a distributed GPU that does the analysis and provides the answer, which comes back through the encrypted proxy to your browser. None of that stuff is stored on Venice's servers. It's only in your browser, and the text of the prompt is on the decentralized GPU while it's doing the calculation. So like if you clear your cache in your browser and you haven't backed up, like you can't get your chat history back. Similar to if you delete your Bitcoin private keys and you haven't made a backup, it's gone. So that's the most important part of like how Venice provides privacy. It never stores the data. So when we get subpoenaed by every agency in the world, which I certainly have plenty of experience with, we'll be able to, we can be responsive and say, hey, here's all of our records for account, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the records will be empty.
When you say decentralized GPU, how is the GPU decentralized specifically?
Yeah, so there are a number of GPU marketplaces around the world.
Like Akash and stuff like that?
Akash has been the main one we use. We've used Hyperbolic. We're likely going to be using Prime Intellect. There's a number of these different marketplaces where they themselves are decentralized, and then various actors can provide GPUs to those pools. And then we just use whichever ones at various times have the best price or the good reputation. So we're not really locked into any particular GPU anywhere, which was a core part of like our architecture, because we don't know how the regulations will change. So we weren't going to like acquire a bunch of GPUs in one country and then suddenly the rules in that country change and now we're screwed. So we can be highly adaptable, and that's part of the decentralization, is just using GPUs from all over the world.
Got it. So that's the sense in which it's all decentralized. So if I want to run a node in your system, it's not like Bitcoin where I could just like set up a node and join the system or something. It's not like that.
There's no, in Venice today, there's no concept of nodes. It's just a normal web app that you interact with, and it will feel like you're interacting with a ChatGPT. Like it'll feel like you're interacting with a centralized service, but in the back end, it's private, and all the prompts and everything are going to decentralized GPUs, and the answers coming back from those disparate sources. But a user shouldn't need to care or know about that stuff. That's our value add, is that we handle that. And so we give you that kind of seamless experience with the privacy and without the censorship.
Yeah, no, I do think the lack of censorship, the fact that it'll answer anything, and I don't really think about the privacy so much. That's coming up more now on this chat that we're having. But I purely use it for the censor free nature of it.
Yeah,
that's enough. They say how products have to be 10 times better in order to sort of get someone to switch. It is 10 times better. That's the experience that I've had, both with images and with the text ChatGPT like usage.
Yeah, so, well, when we launched, we have like these kind of two USPs. One is the privacy, and one is the lack of censorship, and we kind of came to market with both of those in equal weighting. And what we found is that users respond far more to the censorship side, and I think it's because they feel that, when we say it's private, you don't feel the privacy, right? And privacy is only important at the point in a year or in 10 years when it gets breached and something bad happens, right? So that's kind of like a far away maybe problem. And you don't feel that as a user, but you definitely feel when the answer comes back and it's talking down to you like you're a child. That's like, everyone's had that experience with ChatGPT. And it gets to the point of absurdity where like, in Midjourney or in ChatGPT, you can't create an image of a politician or of any famous person.
Yeah.
So the example we like to use is like we would make an image of Trump and Kamala Harris having tea, just sitting down and having tea, right? Like a very benign. There's obviously nothing morally wrong with artistically creating an image of those two people having tea together. And yet the main image generation services censor that.
It's
why?
crazy.
Why? So we don't.
Yeah. It's my go-to to making meme images as well for that exact reason.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So now I had thought, and I guess this is wrong, that there was some relationship between VeniceAI and Morpheus, which is another decentralized AI effort that I think you have some involvement with, if I'm not mistaken. You were the one who turned me onto it, by the way.
Yeah.
So thank you for pointing me in that direction.
Yeah. So they're totally separate projects, but Venice has intended to use Morpheus as like one of its GPU providers, basically. So they're different. They're different layers of the stack. Morpheus is like a decentralized inference network for the GPUs, but it hasn't launched yet. Like it's still being built, and so we're testing it and like running prompts through it and stuff. But it's not live yet. So once that's live, it will become one of our sources of GPU compute.
Yeah, and that'll be pretty. So it'll be one of several sources. So Morpheus. So I do. There is a token in the Morpheus universe. So I do own some MOR, which is the Morpheus token.
Yeah.
So I'm a big Bittensor head. I'm just really curious. What do you think about Bittensor and Tau? And do you see that as a good thing, a bad thing, somewhere in between? I just love to hear your opinion.
I'll say I don't have an intelligent opinion on Tau, but in part that's because every time I ask someone to explain it, they explain it differently. And I've never actually had a cogent answer of what it is. From what I understand, it is an incentivized network to train specific models toward stated goals. So like if you want a model trained in a certain way, Bittensor can and does incentivize training of that model toward that thing.
Yes. So you're absolutely. So I've done like 9 shows on this. So I'll give you the really dopey answer.
Yeah.
So and there's things about it I love, things about it I don't love. So the core concept is, Bitcoin was really good at incentivizing people to supply GPU for a specific purpose for money, right? Mm-hmm. And it was insanely successful at that. But the GPU was kind of doing dopey stuff, right? It wasn't really producing a great product, other than the security of the system, which is, of course, a great product. But, it was doing that basically by guessing gumballs in a jar. And that in itself is not a great product, right? So, yep. So what if that were something more useful? So Bittensor said, well, let's basically make the system so it's just like Bitcoin, 21 million coins, and you mine them by using GPU to produce great AI. Now, the way in which they do that is where it's somewhat controversial, and some people like it, some people don't. They have subnetworks, and there's like 50 of them now. And each subnetwork is a different AI. So one of them's ChatGPT, one of them's image generation, another one is protein folding. So they're all like verticals. It's almost like Y Combinator of AIs, and all these subnets are all doing very, very, very different things. They have nothing to do with one another most of the time. And then there's like a centralized committee of people who hold Tau, who vote on how the emissions are spread out amongst the subnets and who the subnets are. Now that's going to change. They've got this thing called dynamic Tau, where you basically stake your Tau in a subnet for another coin, which is sort of like a meme token for that subnet. And so the idea is if that subnet does very well, commercially or in terms of traffic, your bet will do very well, and you'll earn more tau emissions because they will tend to be directed towards that subnet. So they succeed or not at this? They've sort of succeeded so far, and that's sort of my assessment. It's imperfect, but it's stage one of the rocket is off to a good launch. So I just don't, I think they need to fix some things to get to the next level, but that's what I see.
Yeah, that's a helpful explanation.
Yeah, glad to help. Okay. So, all right. So now I understand sort of how your universe works. So I heard you talking on another podcast, and the idea of artificial general intelligence, the conscious machine, the Skynet, coming to life, that came up, and you seem to be saying that the current direction, and I agree with you, by the way, the current direction of LLMs is not likely to produce a conscious computer. And in fact, that's kind of ludicrous because they're pretty much autocompletes. More than, they're a very fancy autocomplete, obviously, but more or less, that's exactly all they're doing, right? So
yeah,
give us your thoughts on conscious computers and LLMs and how those things relate or don't.
Yeah, so a year and a half ago, I knew nothing about any of this topic. I know crypto and that's it, and I was completely ignorant on AI. I've learned a lot about it over the last year and a half, and I will say I went from someone who, when I would see like what ChatGPT could do and how much better it was getting, and people would say that like these LLMs by themselves are not going to achieve, consciousness is kind of a hard thing to define, but that they're not going to become like these sentient, all-powerful things just by increasing their intelligence in that vector. And I was a little skeptical of that because I was like, man, I mean, have you seen what these things can do already? But
yeah, it feels, it does feel like there's somebody there, right?
It definitely does, yeah.
It is eerie.
And you don't have to project very far out for it to become, substantially more intelligent and capable than a human, which it already is in some ways. But I will say that having learned about LLMs to some degree, having built with them and used them and seen how they're weird and how they operate, and I'm definitely now in the camp that like just larger and larger LLM models, there's some deficiency there that does not get you to a consciousness type thing ever, right? It may become like the most intelligent computer of all time, but like it's missing something else, and no one knows what the other else thing is, or if it can be engineered at all or what. But yeah, I don't think LLMs on their own can act like a conscious being. But I also think like people will figure out how to create those AIs in 6 months or in 10 years. Yeah, like who knows when, but it seems almost certain to me to happen. And then the question really becomes like, the question really becomes like, how do you prepare society for a world in which you have these like hyper advanced intelligences? There's no way to prevent them. Humanity has to simply accept that like we are moving into a phase where they will exist. And how should we prepare for that? Very interesting question.
Yeah, I feel like, my own sort of gut on this is, the LLMs are effectively mining sentience exhaust and remixing it, and they're very good at doing that.
I like that metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the human or the presence, the intelligence that you're feeling is really an amalgamation of millions of microplagiarisms of actually sentient beings. So that's why it feels sentient. It's not really sentient. It's just really good at remixing sentience exhaust, right? So
yes, the question, of course, is like, are humans different?
Yeah, that is a good question, because I've had this argument with another friend of mine, Fred Krueger, and he's like, well, Mark, that's what do you think we are, right? Was sort of his comeback, and it does. I do think the LLMs say something about how our own consciousness works. Yeah. I do think that is true without themselves being conscious or even being on the road to becoming conscious. And it feels like the thing that's missing on their end is whatever in us allows us to create a prompt, right? Like I have agency, like the free will, the thing that sets the dominoes into motion.
You feel that you do.
But yeah, no, I feel like my brain is an LLM effectively, but what's missing in the machine LLMs is whatever it is that gives me the ability to flick the dominoes and set them all tumbling, right? And what is that? We don't know what that is, but that's the thing, right?
Yeah, I think the humble answer here is just that the mind is still an incredibly complex machine that we don't understand.
We don't.
And whether it's only a machine or whether it's a machine plus some kind of soul-like thing, we don't know. And that's part of the amazing time to be alive is like when we are starting to learn some of these things about who and what we are. So I think it's a very fascinating intellectual exploration.
Yeah, if we, the other thing is sort of where the other place where my brain goes when I start thinking about this topic is, what are sort of the weird edge cases of our own consciousness? Well, we know a few things. We need to dream, so we need to spend like a third of our life unconscious. What the fuck is that? Like, is it because our chemical chips need to recharge, or is that fundamental to consciousness? In some way, like you can't be a conscious being without dreaming. And we don't really know the answer to that.
Dreams are the weirdest. I think everyone just like takes them for granted, but it's the weirdest behavior that humans have. You lie down, you close your eyes for a third of the time you exist.
When you think about it, you're like,
you deeply hallucinate. You deeply hallucinate. And what's so weird about it is like when you're in the dream, you can't tell that it's a dream. Almost always, even though inside the dream are completely preposterous things that cannot exist. So you're confronted with all this evidence of things being completely preposterous, and yet you don't realize that it's a dream. I think this teaches us a lot about like how flawed our understanding of what's around us can be, and should at minimum give us pause that whenever we're in our waking state, the things that we think are true, we should always take with a little grain of salt.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. And I'm getting this partly from, did you ever read by any chance Hail Mary by Andy Weir?
No.
Does that ring a bell? No. Okay. So basically
this guy,
I won't tell you the whole thing, but basically a guy goes into space, meets an alien, and the alien is so alien that he has to explain to the alien that he needs to sleep because the alien just like doesn't get what sleep is. Yeah. He's like, so I just like become unconscious and I hallucinate for a third of the time, right?
Yeah, it's
when
you
put it like
thing.
that, it's pretty weird, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So there was a moment, I guess a year and a half ago now, where you and SBF debated, right? It was the great debate between SBF talking about accepting regulation and coming up with reasonable regulation and working with regulators, and you really fighting back against him, saying no, that's fucked up. We shouldn't. Regulation doesn't solve these problems. And I listened to the debate live, and I live tweeted it, and I was just sort of adding my own comments, just having a good time listening to the debate, chiming in with thoughts. Then when it was done, the conversation kind of continued between me and some other people, and then SBF chimed in. And then once FBF chimed in, you chimed in, and all of a sudden my comments were like you guys continuing the debate, and it just sort of happened like in my comment feed, which is great for me. So thank you for the traffic.
Sure.
But and I was like monkey in the middle, sort of saying things. And my sort of impression of that debate was that you had effectively won it by being the better debater, being far more eloquent than SBF. However, I also felt that you were far too idealistic, and SBF was at least trying to hammer out a compromise. Founding fathers, we all believe in America. The reason why America works in part is because of compromises between parties that make things functional to a much greater degree than they would be if there were no compromises. And I felt like SBF was compromising to it, in a reasonable fashion to a reasonable degree, and you were being too idealistic. And even though I liked your ideas, they could never work in the real world. Your ideas worked in the Platonic friction-free universe. That was my assessment. Turns out my assessment was totally wrong. So, so
Well,
trying to learn from you, how did you see that in advance? Did you suspect SBF of fuckery, or was this just something? It was just your principles.
well, I don't think anyone suspected the fraud that was going on there. That was certainly news. Um, but I mean, that debate, I think he fell apart in it because, like, I consider myself a pragmatist. Like, I'm not. There are compromises I will make on things sometimes. It's a question of like, what are they? What are you getting for it? Like, how reasonable is it? Like, I'm extremely ideological, but when you live among other humans, you have to work with them. So I get that. At the same time, crypto exists for really one reason, which is to pull control of finance and money away from government to people, right? It's to decentralize power over value from the state to the non-state, to the market. That's the only reason that it exists. And it is able to do that because of certain principles that it has. Decentralized blockchains that are permissionless and transparent. The ability of any person to hold their own assets without asking permission from anyone. These kind of core tenets of what any blockchain or cryptocurrency is. So you do not compromise on those, because if you compromise on those, there is no point. Like then it is just a stupid meme coin casino, and like, okay, we have these stupid dog coins and we can bet on them, and it's just a weird new way to go to Vegas. But that's not what this is for. Like what this is for is actually decentralizing power over finance. So for at the time, FTX was one of the top 3 exchanges in the world. For the head of one of the top 3 exchanges in the world to argue against the fundamental premises that make crypto valid in the first place, like that's he's going to lose. Like it's easy to just let him stumble over himself trying to justify the entire existence of his whole empire when he himself is pulling the rug out of it. Little did we know he was like literally pulling the rug out from all of his customers. But I think that was the main reason why he fell apart so easily. And he's obviously like a super smart dude, and I don't think he got into crypto obviously much later, and he didn't come from the world of us that were involved before there was money to be made, before it was ever cool, before, like Gisele Bundchen would show up on your advertisements. Like we were in this stuff for very extreme and principled positions. And I just don't think he had a long form conversation with that kind of person before. So
that's really interesting. Yeah.
I think he had too much hubris going into it, and just fell apart. I was expecting him to do better than he did. He really maybe in the background he had a lot of stressful things going on because the Ponzi scheme was falling apart. But
that's true. Now we know what was going on. Right. Wow. Yep. So, okay. So we have a little bit of time left. So I know that a lot of people know this story, but I think many of the people who watch this particular pod probably don't. So you were the one I want to talk about Satoshi Dice. So you were, so I'd heard the Satoshi Dice story, and this is what time frame are we in? We're like
2012.
2012. Okay. Yeah. So, so you basically did one of the very first applications for Bitcoin. And I think you were in Panama at the time, if I recall. Is that correct or no?
When I started it, I was in New Hampshire during the Free State Project. And I moved.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Nice. I moved down to New York to join Charlie Shrem at Bittensor in New York. And Satoshi Dice was my kind of side project during that year. And then I moved to Panama kind of at the tail end of that.
Okay. And so tell us what Satoshi Dice was for people who don't know.
So basically it was a casino game where anyone could send in Bitcoin to one of several predetermined Bitcoin addresses. Each one had specific odds. So where you sent the Bitcoin determined the kind of roll you would get. The roll would happen. You would either win, in which case you'd get more Bitcoin sent back to the address that sent to it, or you would lose, in which case we'd send a dust transaction back, meaning like, sorry, you lost, so that you would know.
Yes. And how did you do the dice roll? Did you use the script language somehow?
Oh man, how did this work?
I'm trying to remember. I don't know how you did that without smart contracts, right? So
no smart contracts.
I know this.
The app itself was centralized. It was just like a central server web app thing.
So maybe that's. But
Bitcoin would come, something like that. Bitcoin would come in and out. But what was cool about it was
you were using. Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, what made it cool, and I think what made it take off, is that it was provably fair. So
yes.
So in the calculation of the bet, we would use a secret, and we would publish a hash of the secrets sort of a day in advance, and then reveal that list of secrets the next day. And so by the following day, you could see that your bet from before was actually calculated according to the proper math. And so it meant that you didn't have to trust me or anything. Like, the math spoke for itself, and it was a good demonstration of what you could do on cryptographic primitives. And so, you have this like anarchist Wild West casino, which was provably fair by the laws of mathematics and transparent. You knew what the odds were on any bet, and you knew that the bet was rolled with the correct math, which was something no casino in the world has ever done, had never done by then, or still today does. Like, so you go to Vegas and you go to a casino, and like the Nevada Gaming Commission has like licensed the machines and said that they're fair and honest, and like you're basically just trusting a bunch of people. And yet here were these like, crypto anarchists that hate the government coming out with the most honest and transparent way to gamble in the world. And I just felt like that was such a beautiful concept to present. And it really demonstrated why Bitcoin was so powerful. And this was just a couple years after all the poker sites had gotten taken down, and people lost, hundreds of millions of dollars because the government stole people's money because it didn't want them gambling. So people were eager for a trustworthy alternative to that. And Satoshi Dice was so popular that up through mid 2013, it was more than half of all the Bitcoin transactions in the world. So from Genesis block to sometime in mid 2013, more than 50% of all of the Bitcoin transactions during that 3-4 year window were to or from Satoshi Dice.
So in many ways, you were like Bitcoin's first killer app, really.
Silk Road was probably the first killer app. But yeah, Satoshi Dice was certainly one of the things that showed people that like you can design new systems on these. And I'm super proud of it, and very, very fun time. It's good memories.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. The fact that you did that, the fact that you could do that. It was a very creative thing to do way back in the super early days, right? So congratulations on that.
And then I also sold shares of it. This was pre tokens. Like, Ethereum didn't exist. There weren't tokens. It would have been way better to do this with a token, but there were stock markets in the early days of Bitcoin they were centralized exchanges where you would trade shares of projects. And this was all very informal, just enforced through the centralized exchanges. So I sold some shares of Satoshi Dice, like 10 or 13% of it. And then people would trade those shares. And each month I would pay out a portion of the winnings of the site to those shares. So that's why they had that's why they had value. So it was a great deal for people. Like, people made a good amount of money from that. And the SEC came after me because I didn't get their permission to sell those shares. So
that's why you get shut down. I didn't realize that. I thought people shut you down because of the gambling part of it, right?
No,
but I guess
never got shut down. Never got shut down. I sold it. I sold it, and right after the news of the sale, like within a month, I got subpoenaed by the SEC and had to deal with them for the next year. And what just sucks is like how much I had to spend on those legal bills. And Bitcoin was all I had back then. So like, Bitcoin was $2.
Oh
So
my God.
imagine how many Bitcoins got to sell to pay a $50,000 legal bill.
Oh my God.
And I wish I only
Yeah.
had one $50,000 legal bill, you know? So yeah, I had to deal with the SEC for a long time, but it set me up well to learn how these agencies operate to a degree. And I got to have a round two with the SEC just a year ago, where they'd come after Shapeshift also. So I was ready for them, and
Yes.
we ended up settling. When was this? Like maybe 9 months ago, and two of the five SEC commissioners actually dissented from the others and said that the commission was like
Yeah. So
acting
Hester
improper.
was one, probably.
Hester, yeah, she's
Yeah.
such a treasure.
She is.
Yeah, so it
And may
was
should be our next SEC chairman or chairperson.
maybe.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard rumors she doesn't really want that role, but I mean, it would be amazing if she did. She's one of the few people in any government agency that I've ever respected. So she's a good woman, and yeah. But it was very cool to get that dissent, and my girlfriend printed out the article that the SEC published on its own website, like where two of the commissioners are like calling out the other three for acting improperly with the Shapeshift case. So that's framed on the wall, and that will always be a treasure.
Love that. That's an awesome story. Thank you for that. So, okay, well, we're almost out of time here. So before we go, is there anything else you want to plug or talk about?
No, I'll just plug Venice again. You can use it without an account. Venice.ai, text, image, code, and yeah, play around with it. See what you think. Give us feedback, and keep.
Is there an upgraded version to it? Like, how do you guys
There's
like
a pro
version?
Yeah, there's a pro version. $49 a year. So great. We will definitely be raising that price. So if you want to get it now, you should get it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I haven't done that actually. I need to do that.
You should do it.
I'm on
you
it.
should do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Venice.ai.
Right.
But thanks for having me on the show. It's been fun.
Dude, thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you. So thank you for making the time for us.
Sure.
My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.